right. So good evening and welcome to Turtle Talk. My name is CJ Wong and I'm thrilled that so many Blue Marble librarians have come together to celebrate Turtles and Earth Day by hosting Ben Phillips tonight. There are librarians and library patrons on this Zoom from 9 libraries from Massachusetts and Vermont. So it's so wonderful. I'm super excited as a librarian, and I'm also a member of Ben's lab, the Rowe Lab at the University of New Hampshire, where Dr. Rebecca Rowe is our brilliant advisor. So it's my pleasure to introduce Ben Phillips, who is a graduate student in the Wildlife Biology and Conservation program at the University of New Hampshire. His research focus is on the ways that landscape change and human activities influence wildlife populations. His interest and passion for this topic was sparked during his time as a wildlife care intern at the Center for Wildlife, a wildlife rehabilitation facility in Maine. Most of the animals that ended up in his care at the rehab facility were the result of vehicle collision or an encounter with a cat or a dog, as you can imagine. And I think we'd all love to hear more about how you did repairs on turtle shells, things like that. I think we would all find fascinating if you want to talk about that. Treating so many animals that were injured by human activities left him wondering what impact those losses might have on the health of the entire population. And with that question on his mind, Ben began his graduate program to examine the ways that human development impacts freshwater turtle populations. So I'd like to turn it over to Ben to talk about the impact of environmental change on freshwater turtles, also known as the Turtle Talk. Thank you, Ben.
Yeah, thank you, CJ. And thank you all for making time in your Tuesday evening to come out here and or hop online and listen to me talk about turtles. Like, I'm super passionate about it. I love it. So hopefully I can share some interesting facts with you and you can get a sense for what I do. So I'll jump right into it. Who am I? CJ gave a really good introduction, so I don't have to go over a lot of this, but I am a graduate student. I'm working on my master's degree at the University of New Hampshire. And like CJ mentioned, yeah, it was really my stint as a wildlife rehabilitator that sparked my interest in this research into how human development and human activities influence wildlife populations. And so I didn't prepare anything on like how we fix broken turtles, but it is really interesting. So I'll just take a moment and talk about it. Sometimes when turtles are hit or crushed or anything where they have cracks in their shell, you can actually use the same thing that you use for braces on people's teeth and just like attach little parts to the shells and then use wires or rubber bands to kind of just like pull them back together and it'll heal. They are remarkably resilient creatures. It's just one of the things I love about them. Okay, we'll keep moving on. We'll talk about turtles. So I wanted to start just assuming nothing, starting with the turtle basics. So the first part of this presentation is just going to be really about turtles, moving through this list of questions so that we can all be on the same page about what a turtle is, what's the deal with their shell, where do turtles live, what are they eating, how do turtles make more turtles, and how do turtles survive, right? These are all really basic questions, but I think things we don't really think about, and probably I certainly wouldn't have known a few years ago about turtles. So it's a good place to start. So most simply, what is a turtle? Well, turtles are reptiles, so that puts them in the same group as snakes and lizards. So being a reptile means a few things for you. It means that you are cold-blooded, you're a vertebrate, and you lay eggs. Being cold-blooded means that you don't generate your own heat. So if you're cold, it's a cold day, you need to get out into the sun, find a warm area. You cannot generate your own body heat. You're going to rely on environmental sources of heat. Being a vertebrate just means you have a backbone. Same thing as us. Means you're not a worm, right? And then I think laying eggs, that's pretty self-explanatory. So what makes a turtle though, right? Why is it not a snake or a lizard? How is it unique? It's really their shell. Turtles have really, really unique shells. There's no other animal in the animal kingdom with a shell like a turtle. And what makes the turtle's shell so unique is that it's actually a part of their skeleton. The shell in a turtle is actually modified from its rib cage. You can see it in this image here where what were once its ribs have actually flared out and become the structure of that shell. And this is super unique in the animal world. It just isn't found anywhere else. And so their shell is a part of their skeleton. It is their modified rib cage, and therefore they can't leave their shell. It is a part of them. They're born with it, and it grows with them throughout their entire life. So that's what that's the shell on the inside, but that's not what we usually see when we see a turtle. So what's going on the outside of their shell? Well, first off, it's made of keratin. So, tap your fingernail. That's the same exact thing that your fingernail's made of. And so that's what gives that outer coating of the shell, that really hard and tough and predator-proof coating that they really rely on. And so that forms all of these little scale-like scutes that you see. We call them scutes. The ones around the outside are called marginal scutes. They'll come back up later because those marginal scutes are what I mark. So we'll talk about that in a bit when we get into my actual sampling. Other than that, the shell is composed of a few separate pieces. There's the bottom of the shell, which is called the plastron. The top of the shell is called the carapace. And then there's this section in the middle that bridges those two together, and that's just called the bridge. And so that's the morphology of the shell. All of that are what provide this amazing protective shell that makes turtles what they are and gives them incredible protection from predators. So where do turtles live? Where do we find turtles? They are an incredibly diverse group of animals. They live everywhere from deserts. We have tortoises out there in the deserts digging holes in the ground and living in holes. It's crazy. There's sea turtles that live out in the ocean. They're pretty much the opposite of the desert tortoise. They spend their entire life in the ocean, under the water. They come up for air, but they really only leave the water if they need to go onto the beach to lay their eggs. And then we have freshwater turtles. These are the turtles that you see when you're driving to work and there's a pond on the side of the road, or they're out in rivers and streams. And they fall somewhere in the middle between your tortoises and your sea turtles. They do spend most of their time in the water, but they do leave the water in order to bask and a little bit of foraging activity, but primarily they only have to leave the water, similar to the sea turtles, when they make their nesting migrations. And so when females are ready to lay eggs, they can't lay their eggs in the water, so they do have to leave their pond and head out across the land to find a spot for eggs. What do turtles eat? So take a second, look at this. Of all the things I have labeled on here, just think about what you think a turtle might be eating in and around a pond. If you're thinking all of these things might sound good to a turtle, you are not wrong. That is correct. Turtles would eat and do eat all of these things. Turtles are what are called generalist omnivores. And it sounds like a big word, but it's really not too scary. All the generalist means is that they're not picky, right? They'll eat anything that suits their needs that they come across. If they can catch it, find it, and it fits in their mouth, they'll pretty much eat it. That's what a generalist means. An omnivore just means that they eat both plants and animals. So this turtle will readily eat these aquatic plants, and he'll also eat fish, bugs, crayfish, tadpoles, everything you see here. So they have a really diverse diet, and that enables them to find food throughout all the times of the years and take advantage of a lot of different habitat types, as long as they have water available. So they have water, they're eating, it's time to make more turtles. How do turtles make more turtles? Like I mentioned earlier, they are reptiles, so they do have to lay eggs. Turtles may not be picky in what they eat, but they are very picky in where they lay their eggs. They require sandy, loose soils that are not only the right soil type, but they're in the perfect location that isn't too wet, it's not too dry, it's not too sunny, or it's not too shady. Because if the eggs get waterlogged or they dry out, the babies are going to die. If the nest gets too much sun, the nest is going to get too warm, or if the nest doesn't get enough sun, it's going to get too cold. And the reason temperature is really important for these nests is actually really fascinating. So when turtles lay their eggs, whether that baby develops as a male or female actually depends on the temperature of that nest. So if you take the same egg and incubate it at warmer temperatures, that baby will become a female. And if you take that egg and incubate it at slightly cooler temperatures, that baby will become a male. And so where they lay their eggs and what temperature it is incredibly important because ideally the turtle would select a spot that's right on that line of temperature so that some warmer spots of the nest become females and cooler spots of the nest become males. And the resulting hatchlings are a nice mix of males and females and not skewed all towards males or all towards females. So once our turtle leaves the pond, she goes out and she searches for a long time. And I mean a long time. Some turtles will travel really far to find this spot. For example, snapping turtles, they've been shown to head up to 2 miles away from their pond to find just the right spot to lay their eggs. And that's, I mean, we've seen turtles move, right? They're very slow. That 2 miles is a long way to go for a turtle. So they get out there, they carefully pick their spots, they dig this hole with their back legs like you can see up here, and then they lay some eggs in it. Most of the turtles we have around here lay on average around 10 eggs in a nest. Then they're just gonna use their back legs, bury them, cover them up as good as they can, and head back to the pond. That is it for parental care. They say goodbye, adios, I picked a good spot, and I'm off. The babies are on their own from that point forward. And so they're gonna stay in that ground there for 2 to 3 months until they start to hatch. And generally eggs are laid in the spring, in May or June, and then they'll hatch in August or September. And it's really interesting. Once the babies start to hatch, they do this thing called synchronized emergence. And what that means is that once a baby hatches from its egg, it's actually just gonna hang out under the dirt, hang out in the nest and wait for the rest of the eggs to hatch until everybody's ready to go. And then they all pop up out of the dirt at the same time and make a mad dash for the water. These are those scenes I'm sure a lot of us have seen on, Planet Earth or other nature documentaries where you see the massive babies just heading across the beach towards the water. This is a strategy to help increase the numbers that make it, because there's a lot of predation of these little turtles. You can see in this picture here just how small they are. So this turtle here, believe it or not, is actually a snapping turtle. In 15, 20 years, he's going to be 60 pounds, but right now it's barely bigger than a quarter. And so anything and everything eats these little turtles. Birds, skunks, raccoons, coyotes, even fish will just gobble these up. And so unfortunately, when a turtle lays a nest of eggs, there's only about a 1% chance that any single egg survives the whole way to adulthood. And this is because, like I said, predators are eating the babies, but predators are also digging up the nests as well. Raccoons and skunks have really good noses. And so they get out there and they find the spots where the turtle has nested and they just dig up all the eggs. And so it's really a numbers game for turtles. And so you might be thinking, if only 1% of their eggs ever make it to adulthood, how are we even seeing turtles out there, right? Like how are populations making it, right? If only 1% of human babies made it, it'd be a different world. They are relying, let's not forget about that armored shell, right? Babies are super susceptible to predation, but only so long as they can fit in something's mouth pretty much whole. The second they get big enough that something has to get through their shell in order to get to them, then they have really great protections. And adult turtles have really high survivorship rates because of that. And many times in wild populations, the survival rates are as high as like 95%. So what that means is that you have an adult population of turtles, 95% of them are surviving to the next year. That's really high. And then they have that high survival is coupled with a really long lifespan. And this enables them to lay a lot of nests throughout their life. So even though any one egg doesn't have a great chance, if they're laying eggs for many, many, many years, the odds are pretty good that a few of them are going to make it. And so we can think about this in the example of a Blandings turtle, which is a freshwater species of turtle that we have around here in New England. And they live up to 80 years. Incredible. They hit maturity at 15, which means that they have 65 years of good egg laying ahead of them. If they lay on average 10 eggs a year. They've laid 650 eggs in their lifetime. And if only 1% of them survive, well, they still had 7 daughters make it the whole way to adulthood. It's not a ton over the course of an 80-year life, but it's certainly more than people. So that's not bad. Okay, I think we did it. I think we've covered the basics on turtles. We're all well on our way to becoming turtle experts. So now I think it's time to introduce everybody to the turtle species that are out there living alongside of us every day here in New England. These are the turtles that you would find, your freshwater turtles that you'd find in your ponds and streams, anywhere near your house. And so we'll go through these one by one. In the top left corner here, with this nice orange ear patch here, we have the bog turtle. In the middle on top, we have the red-eared slider. You can see where he gets his name from this red stripe going down right near his ear. This is actually an invasive species. They're originally from the southeastern United States, but they've moved their way up and are now pretty established here and here to stay. This one in the top right corner is called a red-bellied cooter. This is a really interesting turtle in that it only exists in a very small part of Massachusetts, right around Plymouth. And that's it. They're nowhere else. So it's a very specialized, very interesting turtle. This one on the left in the middle is one of my personal favorites, a beautiful turtle. It's the Blandings turtle. They have just an amazingly bright yellow throat. And these turtles they use the terrestrial or upland more than a lot of other turtles. So they're spending less of their time in the pond than a lot of the other species we have around here. And that makes them pretty cool, but it also has some drawbacks for them. And we'll talk about that in a bit. I think this one here is probably one of the most recognizable for everybody right off the bat. This is the snapping turtle. These guys are hard to miss. Everybody sees these crossing the street and is afraid to help them because, yeah, they are terrifying and have quite a reach with that snappy mouth of theirs. This beautifully bright orange turtle here is a wood turtle. This is the only turtle we have here that I actually haven't seen in the wild. And it's just because they're really not found where I do my research. These are more river turtles than pond turtles. This guy here is called the musk turtle. He's lovingly known as the stink pot. He gets that nickname because, well, he doesn't smell very good. This one is basically the opposite of the Blandings turtle. He spends almost all of his time underwater. You won't really ever see them basking on logs or coming out of the water. They have some pretty incredible adaptations that allow them to spend more time under the water than most of the other turtle species. So they really are just buried down in the mud all the time. And as a result, they end up getting this kind of swampy smell. Down here in the bottom left corner is our only fully terrestrial species of turtle here in the Northeast. This is the box turtle. They are more common in the southern parts of the range than they are up in like Maine and New Hampshire, but they're a pretty cool turtle nonetheless. And yeah, they are fully terrestrial. So they might make use of small, vernal pools or small puddles, but they're not going to be heading into a pond and swimming like you see your other doing. This one in the bottom middle is another probably pretty recognizable turtle for most of you. This is the painted turtle. This is by far the most common turtle we have in the area. When you look out on a pond and you see 7 turtles lined up on a log, odds are good that all of them are painted turtles. They are really the ones that we find just about everywhere. And a lot of my research focuses on them because of that. Last but not least, down here in the bottom right corner, we have the beautiful spotted turtle, another one of my favorites. And so those are the 10 turtles that we have here in New England, the 10 freshwater turtles. We have others that are out in the ocean, but these are the ones we have in freshwater and on our land. Unfortunately, 5 of them are endangered, either at the state, in one of the states in New England, or at the federal level. And so our turtles are not doing particularly great here. And why are our turtles struggling so much? And this starts to get into where my research comes into play. And really, the reason turtle populations are struggling now where they haven't historically is because the landscape around their ponds is changing pretty rapidly. if we look at this diagram, we have over on the far left, yeah, it's a pristine turtle habitat. He's out there in the woods. There's nobody around, living his best life. But people need a place to live too. So we build a house and we move in. But in a scenario like this, this might be a suburban neighborhood. Oh, there's a lot of space for the turtle to do his thing still, and a lot of space for the person. And it seems like, okay, we could see how a turtle would live there and be relatively undisturbed. But human development rarely stops at a single house. We continue to build cities and build big buildings and apartment buildings. And then we need big roads to service those buildings. And all of a sudden, the pond has become a tiny island in a ton of human development. And well, is that still turtle habitat? And if we are finding turtles there, is that a healthy population? Are they going to be there for the long run? These are the type of things we're not really sure of right now. And these are the questions that I'm trying to answer with my research. And so what does this look like in the real world? We can take a look at a few of my ponds as examples. And so these 3 ponds are actual ponds that I have visited. I've sampled the turtle population at all 3 of these. And so Demon Pond on the left here, I have no idea why it was called Demon Pond, other than there are a lot of biting flies there. So maybe somebody was feeling goated after being bit too many times and called it Demon Pond. But nonetheless, it is quite a pristine pond. You can see it's surrounded by nothing but forest. There's one single disturbance here, but it's just a hiking trail. Really nothing to disturb our turtles out there. Compare that with something like Lang's Lane, which is more in a suburban environment, right? There's not a ton. There's still forest around the pond, but you have a few roads and a housing development. And so this is more like our suburban middle level development. And then we have the extreme of Maplewood Pond. And Maplewood Pond is probably my most urban site. It is in downtown Portsmouth, New Hampshire. And so you can see from this image just the network of highways and buildings and roads. There's not a single side of that pond that isn't houses, buildings, or roads. And so what does that mean for the turtles in that pond? And that's really what I want to understand with my research. And so by looking at different ponds that have these different landscape contexts, that have different amounts of development around them, I can compare the population between those ponds to start to get an understanding of what is the impact that development is having. And so my research has 3 main objectives. I'm trying to do exactly what I just said, assess how that development, how the landscape context is impacting the turtle population within that pond. Beyond that, I want to assess how our turtle populations have changed over time. And I also want to assess if our turtles are being exposed to any pollutants as a result of all this development. And so in order to answer these questions, I've gone out and I've sampled 37 ponds in southeastern New Hampshire. And these ponds, so each one of these yellow dots on this map here is one of the ponds that I have gone and sampled the turtle population at. And you can kind of see from the image here that these ponds span a gradient from more developed, more urban on the east side, and more rural, more undeveloped or undisturbed on the west side. And so again, it's this comparison across the gradient that allows me to start to understand what impact development is having. And then beyond that, really exciting is I have baseline data from 2000 and 2001. So that's 20 years ago. I have data on the turtle populations in 22 of my ponds from way back then. So that allows me to compare my assessment now to the assessment back in 2000 and see how are things doing? Are the turtles that were there back then and they were in really urban environments, are they still there? Are they persisting? This helps me start to answer, is that population healthy, even if they're found there? And so before I can make these comparisons between sites, it's great that I've picked out these sites, but I need to compare them and I need to have something to compare. So I have to go out and figure out what's going on at these ponds, who's there, what's going on, what are the demographics like? And so specifically, there's 3 things I'm trying to find out about each one of my ponds. The first thing is most simply, how many turtles are there? right? That's the number one thing I got to know. That's the basic thing. The second thing is, what is the sex ratio? So just how many males are there and how many females are there? And then the third thing is, what is the ratio of adults to juveniles? And that question is really important because it helps me gauge how reproduction is going. It helps me gauge, are they adding new turtles to the population? Is this population potentially growing, and is it healthy? So in order to collect this information, I spend my summers out in waders, wading through ponds with my wonderful field technicians who are willing to battle bugs and mud with me to get out there and collect this very valuable information on turtles. And so I use what is called a hoop trap. You can see one in this image here. It's set in the water like this. A hoop trap works exactly like a lobster trap. I think most people are familiar with lobster traps. If you aren't, it is just a funnel. It's an enclosed trap with an opening on one side that funnels into the trap. And so I place bait in there, which lures the turtle into the trap. He goes through that funnel, the hole gets smaller and smaller. Then once he's in the trap, it's very difficult for a turtle to find its way back out that funnel. So it ends up just stuck in the trap until I can get back to collect the turtle and collect all the data that I need. And so when I set a trap, I leave it in the water for 48 hours. I check it every 24 hours. And I do that 4 different times throughout the summer. And that summer is, spans from May to September. And I'm basically checking it once per month over the course of the summer. And that is to capture any possible variation that might happen in the population over the course of a season. And so for every single turtle that I catch, I measure it, I sex it, I place it into a stage class, and I mark it. So for measurements, I'm recording things like the length and width of its shell, both on the top and the bottom. I record the length of their claws, things like that. So just all sorts of physiological measurements. Sexing it is just determining whether or not it is male or female. Super important for determining that sex ratio. And then placed into a stage class. A stage class, this is just simply, I determine whether or not it is a juvenile or it's an adult. And you might think, why don't I just determine how old it is and actually record how old it is? Especially if, I'm sure some of you might have heard that you can count the rings on the bottom, like a tree, you can count the growth rings on the bottom of a turtle in order to determine how old it is. And while that's not entirely incorrect, like if we take a look at this very young turtle here, we can see that, you can make out some faint growth lines here. I don't know if you can on your screen, I can on mine. There's about 2 there. So, this might be a 2-year-old turtle, but that really only works for very young turtles. As soon as turtles start to get older, you can see how worn down the bottom gets, and it just becomes very smooth. And so it would be impossible to age this bottom turtle. So instead, just based on their measurements, I decide, are they big enough to be considered an adult? And if they are, then they're placed into the adult category. The last thing I do is mark them. And this is super important. This is what allows me to tell individuals apart from one another, because I might catch the same individual twice, and I need to be able to know if I've seen this turtle or not before. And so in order to do that, I mark them using a small triangular file, and I just mark a little notch into their marginal scutes. I told you the marginal scutes would come back up. So again, the marginal scutes are the scutes that go around the outside of the shell. There's typically 12 or 13 per side. And the code is just, you start at the very top and you count as you go back, and the code is just which number is marked. So you can see the notches on this one here. There's one right here, and there's one at the back. So this one is marked L2R10. And every turtle at a location gets a completely unique code. Once it's assigned to that turtle, it's crossed off the list. No other turtle will ever be named the same thing. So we can always tell this turtle apart from other turtles. These marks, they do fade a little bit over time as the turtle grows. They'll become slightly less perfect triangular notches like this, and they'll get a little bit more rounded out. But you really can see them for quite a long time. They are more or less permanent. I've caught turtles that were marked by Mike Marchand 20 years ago. And it's always really exciting when that happens. It's just like a remarkable reminder that they live just so long. It's really cool that I'm able to catch literally the same turtles that were caught 20 years ago in this same study. So that's always an exciting day. So that's the data I collect on every single turtle. And then if you remember, there was one other part to my research that was assessing if turtles are exposed to common pollutants. And in order to do that, I have to collect blood from some of the turtles. I don't do this for all of them, but I do collect it from a subsample of them. I collected it from 35 turtles total. And I take blood from the dorsal coccygeal vein. Sounds very fancy. It is just the vein that runs down the center of their tail. It's one of the largest veins, and it's, I say, easy to find. It was still very difficult, but it is easier than a lot of the other methods for taking blood from a turtle. And so that's exactly what's happening in this image here. Somebody's just collecting blood from the dorsal coccygeal vein. I don't have to take very much at all. Just a little sample will do. Then they get frozen immediately and sent off to the Michigan State Veterinary Lab, where they screen them for all kinds of pollutants. It's very cool. It's more than 100 pollutants total, and it's looking at all kinds of different pesticides, pharmaceuticals, and industrial compounds. So really a comprehensive search for, is this turtle blood contaminated in any way? So sampling turtles is a lot of fun. I just want to take a second to show you guys some photos from some summers sampling, because I think it's just really fun to do. I think they're cool to look at, and it gives you a sense of what a summer is like out there. So you can see in the top left here, we have this little musk turtle who's not very happy about being found there. You can see here the trapping is quite successful. I don't think I mentioned this earlier, but I bait the traps with cat food, which may seem like an odd bait for turtles, but like I mentioned before, they are generalist omnivores. So to them, cat food is just a free meal, right? It just smells like meat in the water, and they're totally interested. So they come flocking for it. And yeah, all these turtles were found in a single trap. So it's really quite an effective way of trapping them. Up here, these are just some of my field techs, Maeve Kelly and Thomas Robinson. They're just measuring and marking some turtles as we're working through a day. This is another one of my field technicians down here, Andrew West, holding quite an impressive snapping turtle. I just love these snapping turtles. And this is me with just a tiny little baby. Again, to show you how effective this trapping is, all 3 of these snapping turtles were caught in a single trap. And now I will say, it is fun getting one snapping turtle out of a trap, but when you have a snapping turtle in a trap with 2 other large snapping turtles in that trap, trying to get that one out without getting bit by the other 2, it's an interesting afternoon. These are, as I mentioned, the Blandings turtles, some of my favorite turtles. They are an endangered species, so it is just remarkable whenever we catch one of these. It's always a really exciting day for us. And another fun fact about Blandings turtles, they are one of our only turtles in New England that actually has a hinged shell. And so you can see this line running across the middle of their shell. They actually have a muscle that controls that. And so when they pull into their shell, they can hinge that shell shut and completely close themselves off. You can't see them at all. You couldn't stick a finger in there at all. They are just 100% protected. It's really remarkable. And then the other thing I wanted to mention is that it's not always turtles in my traps. We do experience some bycatch, some things that were unexpected show up in there. And so some days we have some big fish that are in there. This one here is a northern pickerel. We have big largemouth bass. Snakes are always an interesting find. They usually don't love being in the water, so they're typically a little cold and slow. So it makes it easier to deal with. But that's always an interesting one. And then really odd is whenever we have birds. That one really is, I just never understand how they get in there, but it has happened. Down in the bottom right corner, this is a pied-billed grebe that ended up in there. And we've even had a bird as large as a cormorant end up in a trap. So that one we actually got a call for, because the trap's out there shaking like crazy with the cormorant in it. And luckily my field tech Drew was close by and was able to go let it out. So just some interesting days out there trapping for sure. So I want to go over we'll get back to turtles. I want to go over some of the results of some of my research so far. And I am still actively working on this research. So my analysis is not entirely complete yet, but I can share some of the preliminary trends that I'm seeing so far. And so when it comes to the landscape context, or how much development is around a pond and how does that influence the pond, it's looking like increased development, so more urbanization, more buildings, more roads, leads to a higher proportion of males. And that might seem strange at first. Why would males be impacted, or why would females be impacted more than males? But then if you think about it, it comes back to that behavior we were talking about earlier, that nesting migration, right? These freshwater turtles are spending most of their time in the water, and they only leave when they have to. And really that have to is just to go out and lay eggs. And well, females are the only ones that have to do that. And so the males are really just staying put. And the females are the ones that are biologically forced to go out there and make these nesting migrations. That's making them cross roads more often, which is making them get hit by cars more often, unfortunately, which the end result is you're left with a population that is heavily skewed towards males. In some of the ponds I sample at, we see as many as 80% of the turtles are males. And that's just really shocking. And then the natural next step to that is that we're seeing a lower proportion of juveniles. And that makes sense if you think that we're removing females from the population, right? And females are the ones that are going to be out there laying the eggs that are going to be turning into your juveniles and eventually adult turtles. And so if we're disproportionately removing females, we're going to also be lowering the amount of eggs and juveniles that we have. And so it really seems like increased urbanization, increased development is really disproportionately impacting female turtles, which is lowering their overall reproductive output. Looking at how things are changing over time. So this is comparing my data to Mike Marchand's data from 2000 or 20 years ago. It's looking like overall, we're seeing a decrease in abundance at most sites. And it's not every single site. Some sites have improved, but there is a trend through most sites that we are seeing decreasing in abundance. Interestingly though, snapping turtles buck that trend. I've seen an increase at almost every pond where Mike found snapping turtles. I found more of them. And then there are other sites where Mike didn't find snapping turtles at all back in 2000, and I'm finding them now. So I'm not sure why that's happening. I hope to be able to figure that out with my data, but right now, all I know is there's somehow snapping turtles seem to be coping with these pressures better than other turtles. And then the response with sex ratio, so the number of males to the number of females, this is less consistent across sites. So abundance is generally decreasing, but the number of males to females isn't really moving in any one direction. Some ponds are getting more heavily male, some ponds are becoming more heavily female, some are staying the same. And my best hypothesis, my best reasoning for why this is happening currently is because the sex ratio depends on so many factors, right? We talk about we talk about the disproportionate loss of females, with females moving and getting hit by cars. Well, that's going to change the sex ratio. That's going to make the sex ratio more towards males. But there's other things going on as well, because we have climate change where the temperature on average is getting higher over time. And we talked earlier how turtles' eggs, whether they become male or female, depends on the temperature. So if the temperature is getting warmer, it's actually going to cause more of those eggs to become females. And so climate change may in some ways actually be counteracting what's happening with the loss of females on roads. But then there's also pollutants, and pollutants throw a big wrench, because depending on what specific pollutant is present, it could be skewing the population in either way. So there's a whole class of pollutants called endocrine disruptors, which have been shown to interfere with the way turtles and other organisms develop and it can influence whether or not they become male or female, or whether or not they can reproduce. And different pollutants have different effects. And if you have multiple pollutants at the same time, they can have effects that compound one another. And so pollutants really complicate things. And I think that's why we're seeing the response and sex ratio be so specific at each site, because the exact combination of factors that's happening to cause that sex ratio there is just so specific to each individual site. When it comes to the blood analysis, Michigan State Veterinary Diagnostics Laboratory has a lot of tests to run still. They haven't looked at a lot of things yet, but they have found some findings which are potentially scary. They have found dieldrin in all of my turtle blood samples, every single one that I sent to them. And for background, dieldrin is an insecticide that was used from 1950 to 1970. It's a spray insecticide, so it would have been sprayed onto crops just like you see in this image here. But it was banned by the USDA in 1970. And I'll just let that sink in for a second. 1970, that's more than 50 years ago that this was banned. And I'm still finding it in every single one of my turtles' blood. So how is it still around? It's just, it has hung out in the environment for such a long time because it's very slow to break down. It gets into soils and it gets into waters and nothing really breaks it down. It just hangs out there for a long time. And then the other thing that adds to this persistence over time is the fact that dieldrin can bioaccumulate and biomagnify. And now what these things mean, these are processes, and I'll explain them. Bioaccumulation is a process that happens whenever something is stored in your body and isn't processed very quickly. And so as your body intakes it, it's storing it, but you're continuing to get more intake. So over time, your body's just storing more and more of it, and the concentration or the amount of that contaminant in your body builds up over time. So we can see that here with this fish, right? Over time, the level of this orange contaminant is increasing because it's getting exposed to more of it and isn't clearing it out of his body. And now biomagnification is a very similar process, except it's not a buildup over time, it's a buildup as we move through the food web. And so if we think about this in a turtle system, right, in a pond system, we could think that dieldrin is in the water and the soil, right? And so some plants are growing and they uptake that dieldrin, and now it's in their tissues. And some aquatic insect comes along and he starts to eat a bunch of plants. And he doesn't just eat one plant, he eats a bunch of plants. And now he's picked up that dieldrin from all those different plants, and he's got a higher level than the plants did because he ate a bunch of plants. And now a fish comes along, and a fish eats the insect, and the fish eats a lot of insects. And so the fish picks up all the dieldrin that was in all those insects, and he gets even more of it. And now our poor turtle, he comes along and happens to eat this fish that has accumulated all of this dieldrin through the food chain. And that process of accumulation through the food chain is called biomagnification. And dieldrin does both of these processes. And that's why it hangs around for such a long time. It's so persistent and it's such a problem. And it was banned because it does have some health concerns. It's why I'm concerned about it in this turtle blood. It has been shown to impact the nervous system, and it also possibly reduces male fertility. And so this is just one result from the blood analysis so far. Like I said, there's a lot more analyses to be run, but this one was just very, very shocking to me, especially with how long ago this substance has been banned. So those are my results, but I'm not going to leave you there. I know my results were pretty depressing, so that'd be a tough place to leave the conversation. So I'm going to end with some different notes on turtle conservation, what we can do to help mitigate these things, to help support our turtle populations. And so the results of my research and a lot of other turtle research has found that it's really roads that are the main issue for turtles, right? It's those females getting hit by cars that's reducing their ability to have babies. That's just the biggest problem. And so any conservation action should be trying to reduce the number of turtles that are hit on the road. And there's two main ways we can do that. And these ways are being used right now and do have some success. We can build artificial nesting areas, or we can create crossing culverts. And so artificial nesting areas are just a sandy, loose soil area designed specifically to meet the needs of nesting turtles. So it's all those things that I talked about before. It's just the right level of drainage, just the right level of sun exposure. And so all this is planned out ahead of time to create this perfect nesting spot for them. And then crucially, that nesting spot is located in such a way that a turtle from the pond does not have to cross a road to get to it. Because again, that's why they're crossing. They're not just like out for a stroll. They're crossing the road because they're trying to find those nesting sites. So if we can move the nesting sites closer to the pond, they don't have to cross the roads as much and they're not hit as much. Big win. This has been implemented in New Hampshire by New Hampshire Fish and Game. They created some nesting sites to support Blanding's turtles. And there's some really exciting evidence that it is working. Just this past year in 2021, I went back out and sampled that site, and I found 19 Blanding's turtles at that site. And that may not sound like a lot of turtles, but I have not found more than 5 Blanding's turtles at any other site in all of my 37 sites. And I think I only have 4 sites total that have Blanding's turtles at all. So to have 19 Blanding's turtles at one site, 19 of these endangered species at a single site, is really incredible and is evidence that it is working. And the other big evidence that it's working is that the sex ratio there is excellent. I found, of the 19 turtles that I found, 9 of them were male and 10 of them were female. So that's so close to that 50-50 perfect ratio we're looking for. And that suggests that that road pressure isn't there for this population. So really promising results there. And then if the space doesn't allow for the creation of designated nesting areas, then crossing culverts can help turtles move under roads. And a crossing culvert is just anything like this one pictured here. They can be concrete like this, or they can be the classic metal pipes that we've all seen for culverts, as long as they're at ground level so the turtles can get in and out of them. But it's really just any structure that provides a throughway under the road for the turtles, so they don't have to come in contact with cars. A lot of research has showed that turtles will readily use these. There are some drawbacks to this, however. They are really costly to install. They require a lot of permits. They require you to disrupt traffic for some time. So it's difficult to get towns to have the impetus to go ahead and do this. And they also require some ongoing maintenance, because over time, they can get jammed up with sticks and mud, and it's going to just require somebody going out there to make sure that stays clear. And then the final thing is location. Location is so important with these culverts, because this is not a just decision for these turtles, right? They're not coming to a road and going, oh, I wonder if there's a culvert down there, and then heading down the road to find the culvert to get through at the safe place to pass. That's not happening. They're coming up to the road. If the culvert is where they need it, they will use it. If it's not, they're not going looking for it. They're going right across that road. And so understanding where to put these, figuring out where turtles are crossing roads, is a difficult challenge. But I do want to highlight some really cool research that's being done by one of my field technicians from last year, Maeve Kelly. She's done some landscape analysis for Blanding's turtles. And so this is really cool, really valuable work. She takes land cover data, so just what's present on the ground, and then she uses expert opinion from New Hampshire Fish and Game and other biologists on Blanding's turtles' movement preferences. What sort of land types do they like to move through? And then she can combine that data to create maps like the ones you see here that show you areas where Blanding's turtles, live and congregate, and then their pathways through the landscape. And so down in this bottom one, you can see it zoomed in here, where this blue dot is the pond they're headed to, and this red is the path they're taking, right? And using maps like these, you can identify pinch points where they're forced to want to go this way and they're forced to cross a road right here. So this allows land managers to identify important stuff. These are really the things that we can do to help support our turtle populations. So that's the information I have for you guys today. I just want to thank my wonderful advisors, all of my field technicians, and all of the organizations that have supported me over these few years. I hope you all enjoyed my talk, learned a few things about turtles and turtle conservations. I'm here to answer any questions you have about turtles.
Yay, thank you so much. We have a lot of questions and not a ton of time left, but let's try and get through some of them. So what happens if some of the eggs don't survive to hatching? Do the other ones all still wait?
No, it's a great question. And yeah, I don't know when they give up on the other eggs that haven't made it. So yeah, that's a great question. I do think a lot of times, generally, if the nests haven't been destroyed, it's kind of like if it was in the right spot and it wasn't disturbed, most of the eggs in there are going to hatch. And then it's really, if it was disturbed or wasn't in the right spot, it's pretty much going to be a full failure. It's not often that you see situations where half of the turtles made it or not.
Okay, let's see. About temperature dictating gender in the eggs. Is this maybe an evolutionary adaptation to contend with variations in global climate?
Yeah, it could be. And another hypothesis for why this why this developed is that it does actually give the turtles some ability to sort of self-correct for population dynamics, right? They have been shown to actually select for sites that will help to have more females or more males, depending on what the population needs at that time. So it's really interesting.
Okay, are turtle individuals, like the endangered species ones especially, tracked, like banding or other methods like is done with birds?
So yeah, they very similar to the banding. Yes. So as I mentioned, that marking that I do mark every single one of the endangered species that I find. And the codes that I use for the endangered species actually come from New Hampshire Fish and Game, because they maintain a big database of all of the endangered species that have ever been marked. So they can, if they find one that has a mark, they can look it up, know exactly who he is, where he was caught, how many times it's been caught, and they have that full information on that turtle. So yeah, very similar to the bird banding.
How do the turtles find the water if the parents go 2 miles away? How can we make roads and New England safer for their movement? I think you did answer the second one.
Yeah, so the 2 miles thing is interesting. And it's a really active area of research, figuring out like how exactly turtles do navigate. They do appear to have, similar to birds, some of that ability to use like the Earth's magnetic fields. They can detect that magnetic field and actually use that to help them navigate. So it's like a whole different sense that's difficult for us as people to even imagine what that seems like, because we don't have that sense. But yeah, they can actually use the Earth's magnetic field to help them navigate. And I think another important point is that the baby turtle doesn't care really if it makes it back to the pond that the mom was in. They're just going to head for the closest water, because they're, that mom's not providing any care for them anyway. They're on their own. So to them, it's just getting to the closest source of water.
Do you ever have turtles who have seen the traps before and outsmart it, like feral cats?
So, I think they probably would be more opposed to it they didn't get a free meal out of it. I think the fact in for they don't seem to. It only, I will say, so they're lured in. That's what keeps them coming back, but they're not actually getting a free meal.
Cool. And then somebody did ask about the bait, but you did answer that, which was from cat food.
Cat food, yeah. You can also use sardines, are the other really commonly used bait.
Cool. What are the rates of infection for taking the blood? What are the procedures you use to have some cleanliness?
No, that's a great question. Infection rates are really low because as I mentioned, turtles are extremely robust. So their immune system is really strong to begin with, but we do take some additional precautions to make sure that we're minimizing that. And so obviously everything is single use. There's not anything that was ever used on one turtle that's being used again. We carry alcohol and alcohol wipes out with us into the field. So the area where we draw blood is cleaned very thoroughly, both before and after we draw blood, and we keep pressure on where we pull the blood from for just a little bit of time to help it coagulate and seal up before it's released back into the water. And so all of those steps together really mitigate the chance of infection.
Ginny asked one in the chat just more recently, which I really want to know the answer to. How do you help an injured turtle if you find one? Can I just take it to an exotics vet?
So your best bet is going to be contacting your closest wildlife rehabilitation center. Any wildlife rehabilitation center in the area is going to be either set up to take turtles, or if they're not, they're going to know the right person to send you to. You certainly could take it to a vet, but in that scenario, the vet's not set up to do wildlife rehabilitation. More than likely, the vet himself is going to just contact a rehabilitation that way. So that's definitely what you should do if you find an injured turtle, is call your closest one. Yeah.
Okay. What pollutants are the most harmful to the turtles? As the general public, what can we do? If the rings on the bottom of the turtles are hard to count as they age, how do we know they live to 60 years old? That's the third question. Sorry.
No, that's great. That's great. What pollutants are bad for turtles? That's my research question. That's what I'm trying to find out. We don't have a lot of information on this right now. We know some of what pollutants are out there, and we have some ideas of some that might be problematic, but really there's not a lot of research on this right now. So it's a great question, and it's one I have too. But yeah, so, and then, sorry, what were some of the other ones? How do we know how long they live? A lot of that, the up to the maximum, when we say something can live up to 80 years, a lot of that comes from captivity. Most of these species are in a zoo somewhere, and their survival in the wild is so high that for some species, we think like, oh, they could live this long in a zoo, but in actuality, they wouldn't get anywhere near that. Turtles actually in the wild can get up there for sure. And the other thing we know, sometimes studies like I'm doing, where we look at the same turtle over a really long period of time, also helps to inform that, because like I mentioned, I've caught some snapping turtles that were marked by Mike 20 years ago. And some of those snapping turtles, when I go back and look at his data, were already a foot long 20 years ago, which, to be that big back then means that it was a really old turtle back then, and it survived the whole way to now. So it's crazy.
Here's a newer one that just came in, and I have a lake house in southern Maine and have seen a large snapper. I'm worried about my family and grandchildren. Are they dangerous?
No, it's a great question. I get this one all the time from people, because I'm out there. All of these ponds that I'm sampling in are mostly owned by people just in their backyard. And so, yeah, they see me hauling this giant snapper out of the water, and they're like, I don't ever want to go swimming again. And I'm like, you're so fine. They are not a danger to you at all. They are very, very timid. They're just going to try to avoid you at all costs. They act just like, they look big and scary, and they are big and scary if you see them on land. And that's because turtles aren't good at moving on land. So they feel very threatened when they're out on land. And that's why they, people think they're so aggressive, because if you see one on the road and you approach it, it's going to turn to face you. It's going to start snapping at you. But that's really just that turtle's afraid because he's vulnerable right now. If he's in the water and swimming away is an option, it's going to take that option every single time.
Okay, someone says, what about heat island effect in the more developed pond areas?
Yeah, no, it's a great one. Heat island effect is for sure a real thing in places like Portsmouth. It could be increasing the temperature at that pond specifically, especially because the heat island effect also can happen for turtles. If you think about like roadsides, they're often that kind of loose, sandy soil. And so often turtles do they recognize that as a good spot to nest because it's like, oh, it's pretty dry, it's nice and sandy. But they don't realize that when that macadam gets hot, yeah, same thing, heat island. It's gonna heat up that surrounding area and cause the temperature to get higher. And potentially higher temperatures will skew the hatchling towards female. But obviously at some point, if you get too hot, those eggs will not survive.
Okay. Do turtle crossing signs help much? How can your town to pay and post them? How can you get your town to pay and post them?
Yeah, I don't want to tell you to not go further, because I think everything we can do to make people aware is good. But I will say that a lot of the social science and psychological science that's been done on wildlife crossing signs show they don't really have a large effect. And I think it kind of does make sense. If a lot of us are driving and we see a deer crossing sign, yeah, okay, we know deer cross, but how many of us actually slow down our car in response to that sign? Because that's the actual reaction they're looking for, right? Oh, turtles cross here, I need to drive slower, not just be on the lookout. Because that's the thing, is that being on the lookout helps, but it's really the speed that's the issue. You don't have enough time to react, and people just don't slow down for the signs. So it's not bad, but they probably are not helping as much as people think.
How many turtles have you seen in your career?
Ooh, that's a great question. Let me think.
That's a lot.
Probably close to 2,000.
Wow. Oh my gosh, that's a lot.
Yeah, I catch anywhere from like 500 to 750 a year.
Wow. What would your estimate of the survival rate of 1-year-old painted turtles?
1-year-old.
Yeah. Does that make sense? What would be your estimate?
It does improve a little bit once they make it. Yeah, but even still, it's going to be less than 10%, unfortunately. They just get gobbled up by everything. I mean, even like I said, even fish, big bass, they just swallow them whole.
Okay, and then let's finish with this last one. I write a turtle blog. I'm sorry, I don't know who was asking this, but and try to get experts to share their answers to this. If you could get one message out to the general population about turtles and conservation, what would you want them to know?
Oh, that's a great question. One thing for everyone to know. There's so many things. I think the biggest thing, I would want people to just leave them be. I think a lot of people, they see turtles and they think they need a lot of intervention or a lot of help. They try to move them to a different place, or they try to make decisions for them. Like, oh, you're in this like drainage ditch next to a road. Let me grab you and move you to what I think is a better pond. Or, they see turtle eggs. And I've had people, when I was at the wildlife rehab center, we'd have people call us like, oh, I just saw a turtle lay eggs and I saw a raccoon, so I dug up all the eggs. And it's like, we can't do anything. So really, it's great that people want to help, but the biggest thing we can do to support them is just let them be, let them do their thing.
Yeah, well, this was so wonderful, Ben, and thank you to everyone who came to listen, to learn more about our precious turtles and our precious earth. We had a lot of people on tonight. I'm so thankful that everyone's so interested. And thank you so much, Ben, for sharing your research with us tonight.
Yeah. Thanks for having me. Thanks to all of you wonderful libraries for hosting me and everybody for showing up.